Hello everybody, we're going to hit you up with another presidential election. This one, the election of 1940, the Great Depression coming to an end as World War II is nearing upon the United States. Who's going to win this election? Let's find that out right now. Now we're going to start off with the incumbent party, and that's Democrats. The incumbent president FDR of New York, winning in 1932 and winning a second term in 1936, but throughout 1940 there was much speculation as to whether FDR would break with long-standing tradition and run for a third term. Now there was no law that said FDR couldn't run for a third term, but it was a tradition starting with George Washington that presidents cannot serve more than 2 terms, and he even indicated to some ambitious Democrats that he would not run for a third term and that they could seek the Democratic nomination. FDR really refused to give a definite statement as to his willingness to be a candidate. But however, as World War II is raging on in Europe and Nazi Germany was sweeping through Western Europe and menacing the United Kingdom in the spring and summer of 1940, FDR decided that only he had the necessary experience and skills to see the nation through the Nazi threat. And he decides to run for a third term. And he's going to have some opposition to that, coming from the Postmaster General James Farley of New York. He didn't actively run for the nomination, but mainly from his vice president, John Nance Garner of Texas. These two turn on each other during FDR's second term because of FDR's liberal economic and social policies. Remember, Garner was a Southern conservative from Texas. But at the end of the day, it is going to be FDR who receives the nomination for a third term as president. Now, for his vice president, he's going to bring along for the ride his Secretary of Agriculture, Henry A. Wallace of Iowa. He was an outspoken liberal, but this was strenuously opposed by many of the party's conservatives who felt Wallace was too radical and eccentric in his private life to be an ineffective running mate. There was rumors that he practiced New Age spiritual beliefs, and he often consulted with Nicholas Roerich, who was a controversial Russian spiritual guru. But FDR insisted that he would decline nomination for a third term if Wallace was not on the ticket. At the end of the day, FDR gets what he wants. Wallace is his new running mate. He's renominated for a third term. The Democratic ticket is FDR and Wallace, so let's go to the Republicans. Now, the Republicans were deeply divided leading up to the 1940 Republican National Convention between the isolationists who wanted to stay out of the war at all costs, that war, World War II, and the party's interventionists who felt that the United Kingdom and her allies needed to be given all aid short of war to prevent the Germans from conquering all of Europe. So the 3 front runners for the Republican nomination were all isolationists to varying degrees. They were Thomas E. Dewey of New York, who was a district attorney in Manhattan, Ohio Senator Robert A. Taft, and Michigan Senator Arthur H. Vandenberg. Taft was the leader of the conservative isolationist wing of the party, with his main strength being in the Midwest and parts of the South. Dewey had risen to national fame as the gangbuster prosecutor who had sent numerous infamous mafia figures to prison. And Vandenberg was the favorite son of Michigan's delegation. Also, Herbert Hoover of California, the former president, was spoken of as a compromise candidate. But the Republicans are saying, And no. You know, whoever's too unpopular will get our butts kicked if Hoover's nominated as our candidate. So that was put to the wayside. But one guy emerged as an unlikely candidate at the Republican National Convention, and that is Wendell Willkie of New York. He was a Wall Street-based industrialist who was actually a former Democrat. He was a native of Indiana, and he was a former Democrat. He voted for FDR in 1932, but when FDR created the Tennessee Valley Authority in 1933, the TVA, which promised to provide flood control and cheap electricity to the impoverished people of the Tennessee River Valley, this would end up competing with Willkie's company, the Commonwealth and Southern, and this led Willkie to criticize and oppose the TVA's attempt to compete with private power companies. He argued that the government had unfair advantages over private corporations and should thus avoid competing directly against them. And at the end of the day, it is going to be Wendell Willkie who receives the Republican nomination for president, a dark horse candidate in a sense. And you can say he's also a 1940 version of Donald Trump, just because of his background. You know, he never held elected office. He was a businessman, and he was nominated by the Republican Party for president. Now, Willkie is going to bring a politician along for the ride as his running mate, and that is Senate Minority Leader Charles L. McNary of Oregon. So now we have our Democratic ticket of FDR and Wallace, and our Republican ticket of Willkie and McNary. Let's go to the campaign, and let's see who's going to win this thing. Now, Willkie crusaded against FDR's attempt to break the two-term presidential tradition, arguing that if one man is indispensable, then none of us is free. Even some Democrats who had supported FDR in the past disapproved of his attempt to win a third term, and Willkie hoped to win their votes. Willkie also criticized what he claimed was the incompetence and waste in FDR's New Deal welfare programs, much like the Republicans and Alf Landon did in 1936. He stated that as president, he would keep most of FDR's government programs but make them more efficient. However, many Americans still blamed business leaders for the Great Depression, and the fact that Willkie symbolized big business hurt him with many working class voters. Willkie was a fearless campaigner, though. He often visited industrial areas where Republicans were still blamed for causing the Great Depression and where Roosevelt was highly popular. In these areas, Willkie frequently had rotten fruit and vegetables thrown at him and was heckled by the crowd. Still, he was unfazed by this. So still that stigma for the Republicans is still there. The Republicans are still at this time being associated with big business, and they were to blame in the eyes of the American people for starting the Great Depression, which is now at this point gone on for now 11 years. Now, Willkie also accused FDR of leaving the nation unprepared for war, but FDR's military buildup and transformation of the nation into the arsenal of democracy removed the unpreparedness charge as a major issue. Now, then Willkie reversed his approach and charged that FDR was secretly planning to take the nation into World War II. This accusation did cut into FDR's support, and in response, FDR promised that he would not send American boys into any foreign wars. Unfortunately for FDR, this is a promise that he would later come to regret. Why? Let's get to the results right now. FDR making history in 1940. He is going to win an unprecedented third term. As President of the United States, he is the only president in American history to serve 3 terms in office. He is going to win 449 electoral votes, while Wendell Willkie and the Republicans win 82 electoral votes. 38 states are going to vote for FDR and the Republicans, but 10 states are going to vote for Willkie and the Republicans, and this is a big gain made from the 1936 election. And also Congress is becoming more conservative, so really the New Deal is going to come to an end by the time the 1940s roll around. The Republicans are going to gain Michigan, they're going to gain Indiana, they're going to gain Iowa, they're going to gain the Dakotas, they're going to gain Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado, along with the states that they carried in 1936, Maine and Vermont. So this really showed the revival of Republican support in areas of the Midwest and the Northeast. But however, FDR won a comfortable victory by building strong support from labor unions, urban political machines, ethnic voters, and of course that solid South. That solid South staying firmly in the hands of FDR and the Democrats. And FDR also won thanks to wide victory margins in the nation's large cities. In the North, cities with a population of over 100,000 gave FDR 60% of their votes, while smaller cities, rural and suburban areas in the North favored Willkie 52% to 48%. Now FDR, he's eventually going to regret his promise not to involve the United States in the Second World War. And we'll talk about that next time in the election of 1944. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this election in 1940. I hope you get a lot out of this video. We're going to talk about the election of 1944 next time. And with that, have an excellent day.